Hey guys, this is Biomassed episode 17. Jaysyn is out of availability this week, so this is Sarizel and Pokey Driven.
So we'll just do some introductions here. Start at the top of the list. We've got a few new people here with us this week, so let's start with Ghost.
Hi, I'm Ghost Kaiser. I'm a director for Fatal Absolution and a PC level scout. Glad to be on here, guys.
Iron Wolf.
This is Iron Wolf Saber. I am CP1 candidate. Well, not candidate. Well, not that. I'm a CP1 council member now.
Good job.
He said it to me in the past couple months. All right, Killer.
Hello, I'm Killer 12, CEO of Corporate
He kind of cut out that you're CEO of what?
I'm CEO of Corporate Raiders and Incident Command.
All right, I'm probably going to botch. Is it Leither?
That's right. Excellent. I'm Leither Yitron. I was previously the PC coordinator for Rise of Legion, and now I'm an officer in Molten Mob.
All right, I'm Pokey Draven, CEO of OSG Planetary Operations and co-host here on Biomassed.
And as mentioned, Sarizel, CPM1, also a co-host on Biomassed and a leader in the Top Men Alliance.
All right, so we're gonna a few things going on this week. We're gonna start off with Zell, kind of leading up an update on what the CPM's been doing this week. So I'll let him take care of that.
Yeah. So we actually had a pretty busy week. We had 2 meetings with CCP this week. So we met with Logibro specifically to just kind of general things administratively, and our first update on where Legion is. I know there's been a couple of threads claiming that Legion is gone or dead or whatever, and at the very least I think we can safely confirm that it is still very much in progress and on the way as far as where things are right now. And then our other meeting was we met with CCP Rotati as well as Logibro to discuss kind of preliminary thoughts they had for what should be in Hotfix Delta and what we thought of them, and if we had any other items that need to be on the list. So, good development progress there all around.
Out of curiosity, are your guys' meetings always at awful hours, or did the devs kind of cut you a break and do a good time for you? Because I know you were complaining about it being at 5 a.m. most time.
They're pretty flexible. I mean, the meeting we had with CCP Logibro, he actually had the I have great respect for his willingness to do this. Is he had to give the whole meeting twice so that he could fit everybody in. But obviously, if there's especially certain people involved, you just kind of have to suck it up. It depends if you're meeting with someone in Reykjavik or Shanghai. I mean, the Shanghai hours aren't bad. We had a meeting that I thought was at fantastic hours for me. It probably sucked really, really badly for the European members, though. So, I mean, that's the other thing to keep in mind is what I consider an awful, awful hour. For some people, it's like, yeah, that's fine. That's good. So, there's so many time zones to keep track of that it's going to be awful for someone every single time.
Well, yeah, when you've got studios scattered across the world like that, and a lot of players, I know Denny is UK time zone, and then you've got Shanghai, and then most of the other CPM are North America as far as I know. So I mean that's you pretty much landed like the worst possible spread, but it was kind of inevitable. So I was just curious if they were being nice to you in some regards. That's good to hear.
It's like a different hour every single time.
All right, so if is there anything you wanted to add to that, Iron Wolf, or?
Oh, he pretty much covered everything we did talk about that we can talk about.
Okay. Well, just Charlie's for 2 weeks now, I think, and the dust is kind of settling. People are kind of fitting into the new niche. It's with Ghost and Killer and Leither. I kind of want to get your guys' thoughts, since we haven't heard you before, on what you thought of Charlie and what was good, what was bad, and whatnot. So, Ghost.
Personally, I like a lot of the changes in Charlie. I'm really glad that the scouts actually have something to do. The Mimitar scout is no longer completely horrendously underpowered. What else? I think the greatest thing that I enjoy about it is the E-War changes that made it possible for all scouts to avoid scans. I'm starting to see a lot more variations of suits on the field. I'm seeing more assaults. I'm seeing more commandos. I'm seeing a little bit of everything. I think it's one of the best patches we've had for suit diversity that we've gotten so far.
Yeah, like I mentioned last week, it's been nice to see a much more diverse spread of suits and racial variants of each of the suits. I know the Amar and Nimitar scouts were hurting for a while. I've seen quite a few of them recently, so that's really good to see. I'm glad to see people actually being able to use the suits they wanted to because the bonuses were tweaked in such a way that made it a little more viable. And of course, the assault was a huge buff to the assaults, and honestly, I don't think they really ended up being too overpowered. I rather kind of like how they landed. I know the Amar Assault kind of gets some crazy amounts of HP, but it's still, manageable.
I love my Mimitar Assault. I love it a lot, and I'm originally a scout.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Killer? Anything you want to talk about?
I really have to say I also like the changes. I've definitely enjoyed blowing up one or two cars and a tank with Nova Knives, like having a little bit stronger scans on my Cal Scout, and it's nice to see a lot more assaults on the field.
Yeah, for sure. The whole Nova knife on vehicles is. I kind of scoffed at the idea when it was mentioned in the patch notes, but then seeing some of the videos of these scouts, swarming a tank like little Pikmin and just tearing it apart was pretty amusing. So that's kind of cool to see. What about you, Leither? Anything you wanted to bring up?
Like, the biggest thing I'm really liking is that this is the third patch now. We're on Charlie. I'm enthusiastic to see that they've stuck to their plan of actually hotfixing this quickly. It does a good bit to restore my faith. And not only that, but they've been closing down the feedback loop a lot better than they did for years past CCP. So while the specific changes, I like some, don't like others. Like, on the high level, I'm really enthusiastic to kind of feel like this is definitely consistent, the hot fixing. So that's where I am with Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the concept that you can't make everyone happy, and not everyone's going to be happy with every single change. So, there's some good and bad feedback from all parts of the community, but it's good to see, like you said, that they're actually going in and making changes and actually pushing out a lot of much needed fixes that we've been begging for months and months and months, and it never got. I mean, I think Rattati has reached god level of the of the community, mascot, so to speak. I mean, they're in love with him and the team and what they've been doing recently, because this is the sort of thing we've been needing for so long, and it's kind of like ridiculous thinking, okay, well, if you can do this much in 3 hot fixes, why couldn't you do this much before, when you could actually do client updates and whatnot? So it's good to see that loop closing, like you said.
If I can mention one thing, I was surprised that they were able on the server side to change the sniper rifle reticule. Whether you like it or not, that was a weirder thing. So I'm like kind of up in the air about what they can change anymore. I thought I had a pretty good grounding in what was a client side change and what was a server side change, but that's definitely right along the edge, and that was kind of interesting to me.
As CPM, who gets privy to more of the information, I'm still getting constantly surprised. But then again, it's sort of the developers who are messing around with this stuff.
Well, I think they're just kind of figuring out what they can and can't do. I mean, I know we've mentioned before the proposed changes to the war points on nanite injectors, and they found out they actually couldn't change that, just how it was coded, even though you'd think it'd be a pretty simple fix. So, there's limitations and probably some possibilities that we aren't really sure of, but it's going to be good once they kind of get things more balanced. I think it'd be kind of cool to kind of more into those weird fixes, kind of like the sniper rifle change, whether you like it or not. It was pretty cool to see them be able to figure that out and swap it out with just a server side change. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of those things, is they're definitely experimenting. I recalled a distinct moment this week where they were like, well, can we do this? I want to try and see if we can do this, and they can't do it. But they're definitely poking around to see what they can get at, and I think that they're going to get at probably a lot more things than we even consider on the table right now.
Well, and even just setting balance aside, I mean, there's lots of content that was removed. I know there's been a lot of chatter recently about pulling back the some of the vehicle variants we had before that were removed when they redid the vehicles and whatnot. And I mean, and that's new content, or at least reviving content, and it's not just a balance change. So that's also adding to the game. So I mean, again, people say Dust, it drives me nuts. Because like, no, they've they can do a lot of stuff with it, and they're doing stuff. They're making changes, and the possibility to add content is still definitely there, even if it's not necessarily the client side update you want. There's still stuff they can do. I'm really looking forward to seeing them pushing forward and actually getting to that point where they can start adding stuff opposed to just balance fixes.
Yeah, and I would love to see the vehicle variants come back done the right way and everything. I think that's probably, as long as the skins are still there for the vehicles, it should be relatively trivial. It's just a matter of figuring out the right balance and way to reintroduce them.
Yeah, for sure. That's been a hot topic I've noticed recently with the vehicle community, is they want their variants back, and I'd actually like to see some of the turret variants back as well, because some of the turrets, the base types, I don't really like. I'd like to have some of my advanced types that we had before. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully we can get that in the near future. So kind of segueing in, Hotfix Delta. I know there's been a lot of chatter of what people want, what they don't want. I know one thing that Logic confirmed on the forums is that they're going to be looking at sidearms in Hotfix Delta. So I kind of wanted to get your guys' thoughts on the state of sidearms. I know that the SMG is pretty much considered the win-all in most cases. So one discussion is, do we nerf the SMG to match the other sidearms? Do we bring the other sidearms up to match the SMG? And I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that.
So I guess I'll start since I'm at the top. Personally, I want kind of both. I think the Flaylock and the Ion Pistol are horridly underperforming compared to everything else, and I also believe that the SMG is too strong of a sidearm. On my Mimitar Scout I run a SMG as basically my primary with knives as backup, and it's like an assault rifle at 15 meters. You can drop people with the thing. So I honestly think it needs to be toned down just a little, not too much, but I definitely believe that the Ion Pistol and the Flaylock need to be brought up.
See, I personally, I kind of disagree on that the SMG needs to be brought down. I think it probably should stay roughly where it is, but that the other sidearm should be brought up to match it. I don't think that you want sidearms to be distinctly incapable of killing people or ineffective at killing people. It just shouldn't be as good as using a full light weapon in the same scenarios. And I think that the SMG, at what it does, it's very it is similar to an assault rifle, but it definitely is crippled in terms of range and such.
One of the things that this is kind of speculative, but when they released the Flaylock, their original description of it made it sound like a kind of soft AV option. I'm not necessarily saying that they should definitely choose the Flaylock and they should definitely balance it to make it soft AV, but choosing some appropriate weapon and experimenting with that, I always thought that was a really interesting concept as a tactician, because one of the big dichotomies in Dust is that basically as infantry, the only effective AV has always been primary AV. It'd be interesting to see, relative to something like the AV grenades, another option for I can sacrifice infantry staying power in this secondary slot and have maybe a little bit of effectiveness versus vehicles. From a team-based perspective, it's a big sacrifice to tell your whole team to give up SMGs. That's like a really big stopping power negative. But if you could do that and then say, you have a better chance of pushing away tanks in close situations, that was a really interesting concept. Didn't really follow through. I missed the old Flaylock though, because that was as overpowered as it was. That was hilarious.
In my opinion, the problem for making a Flaylock a viable AV weapon, even for a sidearm, is the fact that unless you're going to go and start messing around with the effectiveness versus vehicles, you're going to have to really buff the direct damage, because vehicles have far more HP than drop suits. And you got to be careful when doing that not to make it too strong, because, if you got direct damage shots dealing 600, 700 explosive damage, you're going to have people, running up and soloing heavies with them.
That's true. I wonder if they can fit in the statistics correctly. That's a good point.
An efficiency change would be the easiest way to do it. Make it less effective against drop suits and more effective against vehicles, kind of the way that our light weapons are less effective against vehicles right now.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if that works the other way. There's a resistance thing on the vehicles, I believe, but I'm not sure that
we'd have to ask the devs.
Yeah.
There's no way to know for sure.
Well, if someone checks the static data export, you might be able to crawl through the stats and figure out something, but Asking a dev will be faster.
Yeah, I'm just voicing concerns.
You could always give it an efficiency bonus. Just make it where it does 200% or 300% damage versus vehicles.
That's what we're
without
talking about.
losing-
Well, the question is whether or not that's something that can be done in a hotfix.
Well, I
Well,
mean, they
they-
buffed the Nova Knives up. I mean, the Nova Knives had a 10% like all the other weapons, and they buffed it to 50%.
That's
so
a good point.
If they can modify that, I mean, why not? Just change the value to 2 instead of 0.5.
That seems possible.
I'm going to go look up the link to static data export. I'm interested because they should have introduced some sort of stat that sounds modestly related on the Nova Knives. So
I think you bring up a good point with the whole having a backup AV. I mean, one of the main selling points for me, because I'm a bit of a Commando fanboy, was the fact that I can carry a primary weapon and then an AV weapon at the same time, and have that ability to actually combat infantry and vehicles at the same time. So I think giving a similar capability to a lesser extent by allowing players to maybe have a variant that makes their sidearm more of an AV weapon. Not as much as a swarm or a plasma cannon, mind you, but have the ability to bring a backup and not feel totally helpless would be, pretty cool.
The best way to do it would be to make the flintlock strong enough to tell them to back off, but not strong enough to kill.
Yeah, it's one of those things like if you're going to sit here, I'm going to keep shooting at you, you're going to start hurting, so you should probably either deal with me or get away,
Exactly.
I find a certain problem to the notion that you can make a weapon just a deterrent without making it an effective killer, because if it isn't an effective killer, it's not an effective deterrent.
It would have to deal damage over time. Like, for example, one clip won't kill you, but if you don't leave over time, I will deal enough damage to kill you.
But then the vehicle just kills you instead.
And that's the big conundrum with AV. We've been dealing with this for ages.
I know. I think that my standing point on the whole Flaylock as a light sidearm is I'm like, why don't we just make swarms a sidearm? That's about as effective as they are.
That'd be the best
Well-
route, in my opinion.
I mean, that's certainly a kind of Legion-oriented discussion. If you ask me, I think there's definitely something to the dynamic of having primary weapon AV in general that has definitely set a flavor for Dust, and it's very difficult to balance. That's at least what we have the history for. Like I said, it's kind of speculative with the Flaylock, but having something with a different role niche in the sidearm slot, other than just raw stopping power, that was interesting to me, and it was very disappointing, kind of, when the Flaylock released and it wasn't like that. Except the Flaylock was badass, so that was a bit of a compensation.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons that, like in the games like Titanfall, where vehicles, in that case Titans, are pretty much prominent constantly for everyone because everyone gets one. The way they do it is you got your primary, a secondary sidearm, and then everyone has an AV weapon. There's different kinds of AV weapons, but everyone's got it. And so since everyone's got vehicles, everyone's got AV, you can make vehicles overpowered because everyone can switch to an AV weapon without sacrificing much. And I mean, again, this is more Legion talk, but the concept that you can make vehicles extremely powerful if everyone has the capability of whipping out
Everyone
AV
can counter it.
works.
And it's not just that everyone gets an AV weapon too. They both give you an AV weapon, and they also give you a methodology to jump on the vehicle and damage it with a light weapon.
Yeah, and
So-
I'm not saying that. Go ahead.
So the inherent point is that every player can always be countered by every other player, which is something that we do not have in Dust, because vehicle design is that the vast majority of weapons cannot even effectively harm a vehicle.
Well, it's also lack of volume, I think. The fact that most people aren't willing to carry a swarm because they know the sidearm is not going to be enough to really keep them competitive against everyone else deters them from actually wanting to carry that swarm all the time, which means that only a few people are going to be actually fighting the vehicles while the vehicles are fighting everybody, and you have that balance that appears there.
Main people I see fighting vehicles are the commandos, because as I said, they could still carry that light weapon. It's a very good AV class.
Well, and that's why I was very encouraged when I saw the assaults in Legion. They're poking at the idea that assaults basically have the commando with the two light weapons, and I think that is going to be huge because a lot of people kind of shy away from the commandos for various reasons, the speed and whatnot. But I think giving the assault class, or at least multiple classes, have the ability to carry a primary and an AV at the same time, that's going to help a lot in vehicles, because you can have a larger saturation of AV on the field, opposed to right now where it's people aren't encouraged to do it because they give up way too much to actually pull it off effectively.
historically, like tactically, one of the biggest issues with infantry-based AV has been both a combination of the fact that you don't have that primary weapon stopping power, and this kind of generalized issue in Dust is that we have a bunch of suits and we have a bunch of different suits for different situations. Infantry is a lot less mobile than vehicles are, and it's very difficult to switch out of that AV fit. And so that uselessness basically requires you to commit suicide if a vehicle is suppressed from your position. It becomes this numbers game. In PC, we saw it just tons. It used to be that forge gunners on top of buildings, and probably still is, one of your best bets for getting the vantage point you needed on vehicles if you wanted to use infantry-based AV. And then the tank drives away, and if the map is suiting, they can go do something relevant. And your heavy is stuck on top of a tower, and at best they can jump off, maybe walk across the street somewhere, and get to a supply depot. It takes like a minute and 30 seconds. It's way too
And the
long.
moment you walk away from that post and PC, that tank will come right back.
Tank comes back.
Exactly.
So it's definitely this. There are kind of underpinning issues where primary weapon AV is its own decision as a game design decision, and then other parts of the game aren't necessarily supportive of that design choice.
Well, still, you can be fairly effective using secondary methods of AV like remote explosives and AV grenades. I mean, my shotgun scout suit uses REs and AV grenades, and I can take care of most tanks as long as the tanker isn't super good.
Yeah, but that's the thing. The moment you start balancing based on player skill, things can go horribly wrong. I mean, like, how many bad tankers do you see in PC?
Correct.
Yeah, I think we kind of need to define, what kind of role do we want vehicles to have in the game? Do you want them to be something that's supposed to be common and easily destroyed because of high accessibility to AV, or the fact that they're very strong, or do you want to make AV more accessible and vehicles harder to kill, so it requires more of a team effort to do it, but people can easily do it without sacrificing much? Or do you want them to be easier to kill, but it takes a specialist that has to sacrifice a lot to pull it off? And I think we've kind of been bouncing between those two and not really addressing a lot of the primary concerns, which, like we've been talking about, is the fact that it's too hard to run AV as a dedicated role and still be viable in the battle, because you are so completely taken away from everything, or you have to give up so much that you can't actually be effective in any other role. Whereas that tank can pretty much roll around and stomp, and he can, I guess what I'm getting at is there's not enough options for infantry to actually effectively pull it off based off what they have right now, given current mechanics and map design and whatnot. So we kind of need to address: do you want to give AV to a lot of people and make tanks difficult to kill, or do you want to give AV to a few people and make tanks easier to kill? And I think we kind of need to decide what that's going to be.
Well, I think part of it, my personal thing is the need for a role is distinct. I think that lavs and dropships both have a very specific role in how they play into the field that doesn't involve just being stronger. They're transport mechanics, and they work very well at that in general. I don't think tanks have a role in the gameplay. I think that we need a bigger emphasis in Legion, hopefully, on actual fortifications that need to be taken out. But I think that what I would really rather see is I think effectively my sticking point, and I think I've said this before probably on the podcast once or twice, is that if you zero out player skill as something you shouldn't balance around, a player should equal a player, which means that if we currently have the game the way the game is currently written, where a tank can be manned successfully by a single player, they should be about as strong and easy to kill as a single player on the ground. If you want to make them stronger, which I think makes a lot more sense from a game design standpoint, then they should be team-based vehicles. I think that they should require multiple seats.
Battlefield comes to mind. If you've ever seen a good tank team on Battlefield, solo tankers are good, but a good tank team is the real strength of a tanker. I have a lot of experience in Battlefield, so I will bring that up when talking about vehicles. I honestly do believe that tanks should be a team-oriented effort. It shouldn't be one person running around soloing it. for maximum efficiency, he should have a gunner, at least on the top turret, possibly another.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things you can do with that too, because if you do have, if you are taking, say, 3 people off of your team, to man a tank, sure, you can afford to have that tank be incredibly powerful because you're also taking 3 people off the field in exchange for that tank. So you can use that to break through a defensive line, but you can you lose a certain amount of versatility as well.
I think one of the big problems with that, though, is that, and sure, if I'm a tanker, I can usually fit 1 extra gun, and that gun always gets put on the front of the tank. I mean, it's nice if you're trying to go somewhere, but if you could put that gun, the gun went and was on top of the tank, you would have a lot more effectiveness.
I believe that
You used to be able
devs
to.
have been made aware of the forums.
Yeah.
You used to be able to do it, and it was a big deal because I would make it. So I'd put a certain type on the top and a different type on the front because of position how I wanted it to work, and you can't do that anymore. It defaults to sticking 1 on the front or 1 on the top, and you can't choose what slot it actually goes into, and it's actually very problematic for people who tank a lot. That front turret is not the best one. You want that top turret in most cases because of the visibility and the elevation and whatnot.
Right.
And so I do hope that the devs can figure out what happened, because like I said, you used to be able to pick which one to win it, but you can't anymore, which is a problem.
I mean, like, my personal opinion would actually be for that front turret to be the driver's turret, because then they cannot fire behind them, and their primary need for the ability to use the main gun and the top gun, which is obviously better, would be to have additional gunners.
Of course, like one of the another generalized problem with the AV vehicle dynamic is you get the feeling with this, as well as a lot of other things, that CCP had this intent to have a lot more players in a single instance when they originally set out to make Dust. Of course, I hope the site maybe one day will be updated not to say 24 versus 24, but we were hopeful years ago that we'd easily get 32 versus 32, and then 64 versus 64 was the stretch goal. A lot of these mechanics would be better supported with larger groups of teams, because you're able to, for instance, assign a significant group of people for infantry-based AV, and that infantry-based AV team is no longer this gigantic proportion of your entire team, that they've gotten a critical mass where they can provide AV support, but they're not hemorrhaging your resources at other locations. So it's kind of difficult to say that number, how many people they're kind of intending to support in structured battles, of course, in Legion, salvage, etc. But is it like kind of critically important to deciding whether, as a community, we really should support the current dynamic or not? Because I really don't think it works at this number of players. That's a personal opinion, but
I mean,
that's a pretty valid point.
My thought has been that if it was set up so that an ideal tank needed 3 people, you could put tanks at a state where you would need roughly 3 people to AV them down. I would like to see a point where AV is considered something that has to be, selected in a team. You hear, okay, well, we need some ADS pilots, we need a tanker, or we need a couple of tankers, we need some heavies, we need some logis, we need a couple scouts. You don't really hear someone specifically saying we need AV.
Well, one of the things that we do tell people to do is have alternative AV fits in case things go real wrong. But yeah, it's definitely not a primary role by any stretch of the imagination for exactly the mobility reason that I mentioned earlier. Unless you know specifically that the enemy team is bringing in a particular type of vehicle to a particular place, and this is very uncommon these days because people tend to either park in the red line, or else they are much more mobile than vehicles were in past metas. Unless you know those things, you can't tell people to come in with AV at the beginning of the game. It's not a role that you're searching for. At best, it's something to have when it's like, oh my god, they had 5 tanks. Like, I don't know why they did this, but this is wrecking us. Switch to your AV fit. Like,
The only map or NPC that I ever hear someone actually being told to bring AV to the start is, I'm not sure if the terminology you guys will understand, but 3-point mushroom map with the PS3 building in the city. I always hear people say, put Mimitar commandos on that mushroom, and it's so assault dropships in the city. That is the only map I ever hear people actually talk about bringing AV because they're so powerful in that central position. Everywhere else, I never hear it, ever.
Well, and then again, you're saying bring a commando because the commandos are the best suited for that AV role because they can still double as something else.
Well, the Mimitar Commando, because of the explosives bonus, Mimitar Commando Proto Swarms they're nasty. It's the only viable swarm suit, in my opinion. I've got Advanced Mimitar Commando. For a non-tank dropship, I can take it down in a single clip if they don't fly away. Because afterburners, yeah, that thing.
Yeah, and I just want to say that it's wrong that the Swarm Launcher is exclusive bonus to the Mimitar Commando. You guys should fix that and give it to the Galdari too. I'm just saying.
I'd be fine with that.
But I think we got some good discussion here on AV. Kind of branched away from our sidearm discussion, but I think it's real good. We kind of need to redefine the roles of what kind of AV means and how it works with vehicles and how many people should it take to kill a vehicle and whatnot. So that's pretty good. So let's going back to the sidearm discussion because that's probably a little more pertinent to what's coming for Delta. We talked about the Flaylock being potentially pulled in as an AV or a partial AV weapon. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I've always kind of, as a personal opinion, I've always praised the SMG for feeling like it was always kind of balanced from the beginning. I've always felt it's an awesome little gun. It performs very well. And I kind of like to see that be more of the benchmark to bring the other sidearms up to that level. My only complaint is maybe perhaps that it's a little too effective at longer ranges when aiming down the sight. It's pretty much pinpoint accurate when you're aiming down the sight with the little SMG. So maybe tweak that a bit. But yeah, my personal opinion is I think we should probably take a look at the Flaylock and the ion pistol, like you said, and bring those up. Scrambler pistol's in pretty good place. I know some people do some nasty work with that. It's not really my play style, but I've seen people tear stuff apart. So that being said, what do you guys think about the ion pistol and the scrambler pistol? What are your thoughts on potential buffs, changes? What should be done with those?
I miss earlier scrambler pistols so much. That used to practically be able to snipe with a scrambler pistol. It used to have some incredible pinpoint range.
I believe it still does. I haven't used it in a while, but I don't think the range got touched.
Yeah, range has been significantly brought in.
It has? Interesting.
Yeah, that's
The one thing that still perturbs me though is the rate of fire nerf that they gave it in 1.8.
Oh, it's painful to use. I try using it again. I'm like, this is awful. It's so slow.
I'm gonna be devil's advocate here. Personally, I like the scramble pistol's rate of fire where it's at. I felt that before the nerf, it was literally a spam weapon. You could spam that thing CQC and you'd pull off a random headshot or two. It was far too easy to use. If they want to make it a mid to long range sidearm, the rate of fire is right where it needs to be. That's at least in my opinion.
It's not a mid to long range sidearm though. It's a short range one.
Well, I think it.
Where does the ion pistol land on that? And then, if the scrambler pistol is short range, then where's the ion pistol supposed to be?
Point blank. Ion pistol range is laughable. It's not effective past 10 meters unless you're really, really accurate in ADS.
Well, I also think it's great the fact that its whole gimmick is that you can charge it up, and you should never charge the ion pistol because it's a good way to die. Yeah, never charge the ion pistol. I think I might have spoken with Iron Wolf in the past about this. I forget, but the concept of making the charge shot actually fire more like a shotgun and use a proportional number of bullets depending on how long you charge it, and then not make it actually blow up in your hands after every shot. I think it should probably consume a good chunk of your heat buildup, but the fact that it overheats even with like a partial 25% charge, I'm just like, why would you ever want to use this in this manner?
Personally, I think that, first of all, overarching concern for sidearms, I really think sidearms should be deadly. They're made for last resort weapons. Where they differ from primaries is their ability to engage multiple targets. I think the ion pistol and the Flaylock, the biggest problem with them is the inability to engage a single target and kill in a single clip. Flaylock, it can't kill like a decently tanked med frame in 3 direct shots. An ion pistol has trouble chewing through med frames in a single clip as well. I think that they both need a buff to damage. Flaylock needs a direct damage buff, and the Ion Pistol needs more damage, somewhere in the 60 to 70 range, which, if I did the math correctly, it puts its raw damage output at somewhere near 680 to 800, I think, somewhere around there, which is enough for a tanked frame. I also think that, as you said, the charge function needs to be brought into line because it's useless. It'll get you killed more often than not. They need to make it so that you don't overheat in one shot. And apart from that, I think the range is kind of okay where it's at. It's just the dispersion also needs to be brought into line. That thing is horrifically inaccurate.
Yeah, I found that you would have to have sharpshooter to make it even viable. And it sort of becomes viable, but it's certainly not the best option. You use it more just because you want to use it, And I think
SMG
that's
would be
not
better.
good. Yeah. I mean, you basically you use an ion pistol because you want to use an ion pistol. You don't do it because it's the best weapon for the playstyle. Because the SMG is, like you said, quite good. Like I said, I do like where the SMG is at. Maybe some tweaks to bring down some of its ranged ability. But yeah, and also the bolt pistol. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I'll be honest, I never see it.
I would agree. I'm awful with it. I prefer higher fire rate weapons, but I
Is
never
that a
see
thing
people get
that
killed with it.
exists?
It's a great
I
finisher.
love mine.
It is.
It's a nice weapon. It's just that it's really off-putting with the way it works, and that's why a lot of people don't want to use it. But if you can land all shots with it, it's a pretty powerful pistol.
I honestly want to say that I really would love to turn it into the legitimate Space Magnum. I would be all for removing its spool up time and then just giving it some insane recoil to compensate.
Or at least remove between every shot and just have it for the initial one.
That'd be an interesting way to put it. I could live with that, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, especially when its operation reduces the charge time. But from my understanding, it's not the charge time between shots. It's just the initial charge, which it doesn't really, help that much.
It's DPS, as I said. The problem with it, in my opinion, is that sidearms are supposed to be there for when you've caught with your pants down reloading, okay? You've got this guy in front of you. You have to kill him right now. You don't care about anyone else, just him. If you pull out a flaylock, you won't kill him in one clip. You'll get killed and reload. Ion pistol, you'll miss half your shots. You don't deal enough damage. You die and reload. Bolt pistol, you just take too long to kill. It has the damage there, but just the charge up and between the shots, anyone decent will drop you, and that's it. SMG, it'll rip through people. It does its job. MagSec does it too. The scrambler pistol will tear people if you get headshots. It's in that reference that I think the other sidearms are really underperforming, and it's why we don't see them, because they don't do their job when it counts.
Well, the other thing that sidearms could do is fill in a role that your primary weapon may be missing. For example, sniper rifle and SMG is a very good combo because sniper rifles are terrible at short range.
I think I read a post on the forums very similar to this. But yeah, no, I do agree with that as well, and that's why I'd love to see the bolt pistol having more range. So it'd be a good weapon to use if you're using something shorter range, like an assault rifle, so you can still hit people out that range, or a shotgun. Yes.
One of the really nice things about sidearms that I always enjoyed was they had a bit of a consistent design, at least for the ones that count. The SMG has usually been the jack of all trades sidearm, and then the other sidearms have had this kind of stipulation that this will work really well if you land a skill shot. And that was kind of its defining role as a sidearm. It's not like a regular weapon where, if you don't hit a headshot or, you don't control the dispersion or whatever, you can still easily control it in many cases. It'd be really nice to see them unify the sidearms in some fashion or another to bring the ones that are lacking, like the flaylock, like the bolt. I don't have an opinion on the bolt pistol because, frankly, I've never used it, but to bring those more in line with that mentality, because to me that kind of screams sidearm. That's like, this is auxiliary, but if you're a specialist, like, you've got that much more of a leg up. It's kind of a fun dynamic.
The thing that I'm thinking about is how I would think the bolt pistol to work is to have it work like a revolver would in other games, because it has a small clip like a revolver does, and have it as a slower rate of fire, which it does have, but have it have a little bit more stopping power than it does have, which feels like that's what it is lacking.
Space Magnum?
Yeah, basically. No, I'm all for
That's a better
that.
term.
Hand cannon.
There we go, Destiny already.
No, it's a common weapon class in a lot of your more recent shooters lately,
I
where you
know.
just have this really exceptionally powerful pistol and you just one-shot everything with it.
I used to play Counter-Strike. We can call it Deagle, and that way if
There we go.
someone gets the headshot, we can call it a 1-Deag, which is one of my favorite lines from any game.
Yep.
Now, one thing I've been kind of thinking about, which might get your thoughts on, is we've got the MagSec, which is the SMG for the Kaldari, which is kind of like a mini rail rifle, and you've got the SMG, which is a little mini combat rifle for the Mimitar. And I would like to see, an SMG, a full auto sidearm for the Amar and Galente. Now, we obviously can't add assets, so what are your guys' thoughts on adding a assault variant, so to speak, which is a full auto version of the pistol, like a machine pistol, for like an assault, ion pistol, it's a full auto, or an assault scrambler pistol, to kind of be as a placeholder for what the SMG would have been, but give that option for a high fire rate weapon that matches those damage profiles.
Well, I see two problems with this. One, from a first-person point of view, you may wind up with a broken graphical display, because Scrambler Pistol already does some weird things as is, and especially if you start triggering it way too fast. The other problem is other players. When you are looking at another player, you're usually trying to check out what sort of weapons they have in order to assess the threat. If he's holding a Scrambler Pistol and it's full auto, there's the same model of that pistol that's much longer range, but single shot, then that's going to throw off the threat assessment.
Normally,
you
I
also-
agree with you at this, but we already have those. You don't know the difference
Yeah.
between an assault scrambler and a normal scrambler. You don't know the difference between an assault combat rifle and a normal combat rifle. We know what they could possibly have because of the gun, but I personally enjoy that little bit of, okay, what does he really have? You could be a little more cautious into the front of the engagement until you actually know what he's using.
But the variances is that there's a range of variances, though. There's a range of expectations, and there's only so much far that weapon can go. For example, you're never expecting the Galente plasma rifle to be out sniping you with your rail rifle, even if
Well,
they
yeah,
do have the tactical variant.
But that's going outside of its class. I mean, like you've got plasma, projectile, laser, and rail. You're never gonna expect a Galente weapon to outrange a Kaldari. I would, however, expect a Galente tac to outrange a combat rifle, a pure one. I would be fine with that. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm fine with the variants being different, but having the same model, so long as they don't overstep their bounds too much.
And that's what I was basically saying too. If you go too far to it, then it's going to really upset plenty of players.
It is a concern. I would say a smaller one, but still a legitimate concern.
Another thing on sidearms I found interesting was the recent decision to make the sidearm damage mods be an 8% at complex. I'd always kind of thought, okay, well, it's a damage mod, they all have the same profile. I never really considered the idea of making lights and sidearms actually have a higher percentage than, say, heavy. So I think that's interesting. I, again, haven't played around with them enough to get a strong read on if those damage mods are helping enough to bring them up in terms of, viability as a weapon. So I think, that aside, I think we should probably focus more on balancing the weapons amongst themselves against the SMG, so to speak, in the MagSec. But I am glad to see that with the increase to the fitting slots and the HP of the medium frames, that we're actually getting a boost to the sidearms to kind of help them keep up. And it also allows for some interesting gameplay, because I know someone mentioned they use the SMG as a primary weapon, which is pretty legit. So it's cool to see that you can actually do that and gain some advantage in having that additional damage over what you would have with like a light weapon damage modifier.
Well, the main reason that was Ghost that was used this SMG as a primary, because it's not really a primary. Knives are my primary on that suit. The Mimitar Nova knives on this suit are absolutely deadly. And since I'm point blank anyways, that assault SMG is absolutely fantastic. Especially if you really want to go glass cannon, you can run 2 complex sidearm damage mods and it will flat out shred people if they're not careful. It's insane how quickly you drop them.
I think that as a balanced change, that was pretty cool to see, because the high slot, the opportunity cost of giving up that high slot basically guarantees that you're not going to be installing a sidearm damage modifier unless it's you're doing a specialist suit. you're
Like
running
glass can, yeah.
glass cannon Nova knives and SMG or some other interesting combination, and I kind of liked that they were able to squeeze that in, I guess, and it really doesn't change too much of the other balance mechanics. So kudos, and I love to see there isn't that much stuff and dust that you can touch like that and not have some sort of horrible ripple effect. But in this case, I was real pleased.
Yeah, that was pretty legit. So moving forward, we're kind of getting close to the hour mark here. Another discussion, I'd hoped to get Cross on here because Cross kind of started the thread on the forums, but discussion for Delta is thoughts on revamping the support role and the logistics suits, and what do they need? Anything? What should change? I kind of want to get you guys' thoughts on the support role in general, and anything you think needs to be modified.
Personally, who here has played XCOM? Out of curiosity, just by show of voice. Okay, well, my comparison there dies. Support class in XCOM I considered to be very, very, very similar to what I wanted it to be in Dust, which was it was similar to the Assault in the fact that it could perform on the front lines, but it didn't have the killing power. It was still it was a support class. It helped the people around it. It wasn't just the little equipment trolley. They actually had a very important role in suppressing targets and providing backup. They weren't the main slayers. They weren't as tough, but they could hang with them. That's what I'd like to see the support class like.
Yeah, I totally agree. I hate the mentality that, oh, well, you're a support class, so you should be terrible at killing anything. So, you get a sidearm and that's it. I think that as a general design, every suit should be a combat suit. It needs to be effective in a combat situation, some better than others, some better in certain ways. The scouts being better in more of a stealthy combat, the assaults and commandos more as a frontal, and the sentinels as a defensive. But I think saying the logistics are not a combat suit is just wrong. I think they're more of an indirect combat. They're good with mass drivers. They're good at suppression, that sort of thing. And I don't like that mentality that you need to nerf the combat effectiveness of a logistics suit, because a lot of people will quote, oh well, Logi ships and Eve don't have any guns, and I went, well, you're right, but the fact is that Logi ships and Eve can make other ships impossible to kill. The potential support abilities of a Logi ship and Eve are astronomically higher than the support of a Logi suit in Dust, and so I think to try to make that comparison is not viable. So you need to kind of look at the logistics, don't get hung up on the term, and understand that it may not be, like you said, the best killer out there. It's not the Slayer, but it can still actually put up a fight, and it's not going to be totally screwed if it gets caught with his pants down.
I mean, it's an FPS. Going back to that example for me, if this is one of these conversation topics that I love to have with people, Eve has a lot of things that can inform Dust, but it has a lot of things where you need to be skeptical and say, whoa there. And that's one of those places where it's like logistics with very low combat capability in an FPS is no fun. It's just legitimately, it's not as fun as it is in an MMO, because in an MMO, you're having a primary combat capability isn't necessarily how you would interface with the game on a regular basis. It's not kind of...
No one likes being the equipment trolley, is what you're saying.
Right. Well, I mean, that's just not an FPS thing. I agree wholeheartedly that if at any point you end up with a high-level objective of like, let's make this so that it basically only does equipment or auxiliary roles, and when it shoots things, it's basically impossible. That's what's gotten us into problems with like tiers. It's actually the same exact problem with tiers, not to get off on a different discussion, is that you shoot people and you have no ghost of a chance of winning. Pun intended, I guess. But one of the interesting things, I haven't seen the thread that Cross posted. I've heard some interesting news from the CPM about some ideas with uplinks. I know you guys can't talk about it, but I will say that the logistics role has a very interesting niche in Dust, because the spawning system in Dust is incredibly cripplingly flat, and that the only way that CCP ever resolved that in the past was with uplinks. And they basically buffed uplinks to the point that they could be a crutch that the spawn system can lean on these days, because there's no other form of mobile spawning whatsoever.
I hate
I
uplinks.
will say,
I hate them so much.
I hate that we have to rely on them, but the other options I usually see are things like medium attack vehicles. Those are never coming until Legion, right? So, like, without those sorts of other mobile options, I will say that the logistics role, I kind of see where they are now as a lot better, a lot better than where they were in the past, especially now that the assault is maybe moving more into line with the standard I want to kill shit suit, and then the logistics is kind of like, I'll use this for some equipment, and I think it's a little bit more in line. It's able to kill things. I would like to see some more suppression-based weapons. I miss the mass driver as a suppression-oriented weapon.
Like a machine gun?
Well, that's a map design thing. But yeah, like area denial, maybe I should say, is kind of a niche that we're missing in weapons that I'd kind of like to see. I want to say come back, but it was never really there. I'd like to see some weapons oriented around area denial that aren't necessarily oriented towards raw killing. That being said, you should always be able to kill someone with whatever you have in your hands.
So similar to the AV as a deterrent thing, it's very hard to do area denial without area death.
Yes,
That's
it's the threat of death that keeps people out.
You're gone.
So yeah,
So cut out.
Sorry, it's a difficult balance discussion. That's true. It's kind of a high level concept. I won't pretend to say I have an answer to say do this, these numbers here, buff the mass driver like this, and nerf this, armor class. But I kind of miss that from the logistics role. Being able to put someone in a role where they both provide equipment and they provide this auxiliary ability to area deny would be really cool. Of course, the maps aren't suited for that, and that's just kind of true. They're very close quarters. It's a more generalized problem, but
I think there's a lot of things we could fix with map design if map design was still on the table as things we could change.
Yeah, I think map design is a big issue for like what you talk about, logistics and suppression as well as vehicles. I think that overall it's just the way it's set up just does not lead to balanced gameplay. It allows certain groups to dominate over others, and it's not a good thing. But unfortunately, like Zell said, we don't have the ability to change that at this point, which is a real shame, because I think it's a really big problem, and I really urge CCP to make sure they're looking closely at their map design and looking at the problems that it caused in Dust, and make sure they don't repeat the same issues in Legion.
Right. It up. It's totally true that we're never going to see a lot of these high level issues fixed. I guess the conclusion is that I'm liking the Logi more now than basically I have for a year and a half in Dust. Not to say there aren't things that can always be improved, but
yeah. Let me ask you guys this: do you feel, as a general concept, that a logistics suit should be of a similar survivability as an assault suit with all of its equipment on?
Yes. If you're running a logistics suit, I mean, I think that your ability to tank is probably more important than, because you already have a very solid bonus to equipment. If you can't go and get to the lines for a lot of the equipment for nanohives, for injectors, and for uplinks, you're not going to be able to really use them.
Yeah.
In a rep tool, you can sit back and use it, and with scanners, you can use those from behind. But the majority of what a logistics user uses, you have to get in there and actually take some fire and fight.
And bear in mind that if you're the other thing is that if you're the Logi, you're probably not the one getting rep tooled. So you do need a little bit of a tankiness to you so that you can continue to Logi the actual damage dealers. I mean, I think if you have to sacrifice something for the equipment, it is going to be your damage dealing potential. It just can't be to a degree that it takes away your ability to kill people in general.
You want to be careful though, because I mean it's great. I do believe they should be survivable, but they have to pay for that with mobility. I remember I was reading through the thread of suggestions, and some people are saying make the logistics faster. And I just want to point out that if you're not careful, you will have the Slayer Logies back, where they'll be just as tough as assaults, just as fast, but with more CPU, PG, and tons of equipment. And when you get to that stage, no amount of bonuses is going to overcome the fact that it's just intrinsically a better suit at that point.
Yeah, and that might be the sort of thing that can be fixed when you down the road in Legion, when you're talking about the idea that an assault suit might have 2 light weapons. Something like that, where there's a distinct equipment slot difference, or a different slot benefit to being an assault.
It's an incomparable bonus that can't be replicated with fitting or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has tended to be the central issue in balancing these things. I have been, again, happy to see that the assault suit, what they've been able to do is, give them more slots in certain places. I was always, the original Logi template was like, let's give them more high slots and low slots than a comparable assault suit. And in the current environment with Dust, modules are basically the only deciding factor, the number of modules for the actual core statistics that you get off that suit, especially when they're as similar in speed and other statistics as the logistics suit and the assault. So, like, the balancing game is real hard where these things are concerned.
I mean, I would lean on saying that if your suit has more equipment slots on the Logi, then your assault should perhaps have more in terms of high and low.
I would agree with that. I've always thought that the way to think of it is modules give versatility. Equipment gives you utility. So you want your assaults to have more slots because it allows them to be more versatile. They can run like shields, they can run rechargers, they can run then regulators, they can even run a little bit of armor rep, or they can even start running damps, or they can even start running code breakers, which kind of plays into their role that they try to sell us of it being a versatile frontline suit. The logistics class has the utility side of it, where they get all the equipment to make that possible. Instead of having to go trudge back to a depot or switch out a suit to repair, they're saying, hey, here's your ammo, here's your scans, here's your spawns. They enable the combat, but the assaults are the ones that should still always be at the front lines. And I honestly do think that the difference between modules and equipment slots is the way to do that.
I would agree with that.
The problem I can see with that, though, is that if we're assuming they have similar survivability, but the assault has more slots, that means that you effectively have to give the Logi higher base stats. And since base stats, PG and CPU aside, I'm talking just HP values and sprint speed and whatnot, are the same for between tiers, that means that an assault suit, like a standard assault suit, is going to have less slots than, say, a proto does, but that the Logi suit is going to have the same base stats as a proto Logi, even at standard level. And so you have a situation where Logis at lower levels are going to be outperforming an assault, or rather performing better than they should in comparison because their base stats are higher. So I tend to prefer the concept that you make the slot layouts uniform within the frame, where assaults and Logis have very similar stats, but then you balance with the GCPU and the base HP and maybe some of the regen stats as well. Because I worry that if you have differences in base stats, but you try to balance that with slots, you have issues between the tiers.
Yeah. It's a valid concern.
Base stats are typically, unless you're looking for the fact that logistics and assault are similar roles, they're both medium frames, it makes editing their base stats a very careful balancing game. Usually, in my experience with the way they've balanced us, the only time when base stat differences have added up to anything even incredibly similar to slot differences is the difference between roles. For instance, the Amar assault used to have additional HP on both shield and armor. It was kind of the Omni tanking class, and it just didn't have any real difference because it was missing a slot.
Yeah, some of the early methodology for the Amar was just goofy coming from an Eve perspective. I'm like, what? They've got equal shields and armor and slot. What? You know, I was like, this isn't going to work, and it really didn't. It fell behind, like you said.
Luckily, that's no longer the case.
Yeah, it's a shame though, because they finally decided to fix that after people had spec'd into stuff, and you know, I can understand some frustration going into a Galente suit expecting it to be the king of armor tanking, and then you change the MR to what it should be, which is the king of armor tanking, and people are now stuck with a suit they didn't really want. So I can understand some frustration with that, but overall, I'm glad to see that they actually got that racial theme right, because that's one of the things it's just been bugging me all along, is that the MR just weren't fitting in the way they should have been.
Cough, cough, respec, cough, cough.
One thing I have to say about all this, though, is the fact that we don't have a certain tool that a lot of other shooters usually have access to, which is restrictions or class layout. For example, the support classes, they're only given carbines or lighter machine guns, and never anything that's the equivalent assault class would have. But inversely, the assault class can never have access to any of the things that the support classes usually do. So no med kits, no ammo resuppliers, none of that. It's usually just more grenades or maybe the anti-vehicle stuff. Because Dust is so freeform with the way you fit its modules, it's what's making it really hard to balance between logistics and assaults, basically.
Yeah, because you effectively have classes, but the lines between the classes are very fuzzy. Because, like you said, in Dust, you can put a repair tool on an assault suit if you want to. You aren't restricted to that, or you can put, a assault rifle on a Logi. You aren't restricted to not being able to do that. I think you need to, instead of restrict gameplay, you need to heavily encourage it, a certain gameplay, modes. I mean, like with Logis, you've got your bonuses to equipment. So if you want to rep people, you're going to do it with a Mimitar Logi. You're not going to do it with an assault suit, because it's just simply better. And I think encouraging gameplay or types of gameplay with certain suits is the best thing to do. CCP-Z released this concept for Super Question and Legion, kind of restricting stuff. I pretty much flipped the gasket. I was not happy. I didn't like the idea of restricting. I think it should be more focused on encouraging a certain kind of gameplay for each class rather than enforcing it.
I like to clear that up real quick. That is only with skill training. Well, if you still get the suit and you train things in another class, you can still swap around stuff as Odo's is right now.
Well, I'd certainly hope with the feedback that he received from that thread that perhaps we could find a hybrid solution between the exact specifications of what were there and kind of a system where, at the very least, you're able to train. I like the idea of being able to direct people towards particular role classes. I do not like overly restricting weapons in particular. Obviously, having the line between heavy weapons and light weapons has served us really well. However, it'd be real frustrating especially with the way that Dust has characteristically made weapons that feel a particular way. They're more distinctive than a lot of other games as well. So, like, I don't have as much fun if I'm forced into for instance, if I were forced into something like a rail rifle, as opposed to a scrambler rifle or a dichotomy like that, I'd be real disappointed with my gameplay, because one or the other, I might just prefer its firing style.
One of the things I love about I said it was the versatility, because it's something that I dearly love about Dust. For example, when I played a PC versus OH today, I ran into a gal logistics that ran a shotgun, and I was very surprised until I thought about why he was running it. He was running a Galente Logi that was damped and running focus scanners. The whole point of the suit was built around eliminating scouts, and I remember looking at that and saying, "What an odd setup!" But you know what? It worked. It wasn't the most effective way to play a Logi, but it did the job. And that's one of the things I love about the game, is the versatility. And I completely agree that you shouldn't be restricting Logis to only certain weapons, or assaults to only certain weapons. I love that versatility and the way the things change. I love it. It's one of my favorite things about Dust.
Equipment, cloaks. Pokey, you're mentioning steering people, steering classes towards particular roles. Cloaks are, of course, the quintessential example, and whether you love or hate how they were actually implemented, the actual mechanical basis of making it so that you can put it on something else. But you better have some sort of crazy idea if you're going to put a cloak on an assault suit, because that's all you're getting. That concept is probably hyperbolic, from what the standard, say, equipment on an assault suit might look like. But that's the kind of feeling that the kind of mechanic that works really well, in my opinion, for these things. It maintains the versatile, like Ghost was saying, equipment standard, but at the same time, it doesn't let logistics, take on all the characteristics of an assault class.
Yeah, I mean, well, the cloak bonus is a straight Eve example of how they encourage or heavily encourage, a certain module usage on a ship, or in this case, a suit. Is you make it so it's not really a good idea to fit it on something else because of the lack of a reduction bonus. So, I think in some cases that's good, but like Ghost was saying, you really don't want to kill that versatility, because you've got some really awesome stuff you can do, and you may not think, oh, a shotgun is good for a Logi weapon. Well, for someone it might be, and I think for what Z was doing, I totally agree with his end goal, which is, the progression system is very confusing in Dust. People, join up, they start playing the game, they join the corp, and they ask me, what should I train? And it's like, well, okay, well, what do you want to do? And then I have to walk them through, what skills they should be training in what order and whatnot. And I think that's kind of what he was trying to deliver, was that here's a skill tree for what you should probably be training if you want to do this particular role. Now, I think that's a good idea, but I also think it's a bad idea that you restrict people and force them into that form. So, I mean, I kind of put together a thing a long time ago when this first came out, where it was similar to his methodology, where you could, say, okay, this is kind of the order you want to train stuff in, skill by skill, this is what you should be training. But you could flip a switch and it would turn on all of the other available skills. So all the skill tree really did was hide skills that were unrelated to the class, but if you wanted to train those other skills, you could flip a switch and go into the really meaty part of the skill system, which is what we have now, where you have the entire skill tree open up and visible. And there's no limitation on being in either of these modes. It's just, it hides the stuff that you probably don't need to see as a new player, but if you want to, you've got the option to actually turn that on and take a look at it. So I think in terms of what he's trying to achieve, I think it's a really good idea. It's good. I just want to really stress that they not restrict people and force them into a certain training methodology just to make it easy. Make it easy, but still leave that option open to do some goofy stuff. Let us make stupid choices, but tell us when we're going to do it.
Customization.
I suggested a certificate system, basically. Eve had one earlier, but they revamped that entirely. But it's basically, this is how a Kadari Soul is put together. Here's all the skills and things you need for it. But this is just only for a certificate. It's not needed for skill training.
Yeah, and the new system that they have, ISIS, is fairly nice at that. It's sorted by what suits, or in this case, what ship classes that you can be for each race, and then it has 1 through 5 mastery tiers, and so you can see that it's not going to suggest that you max out a certain skill to get to that first tier of mastery. It's going to recommend and kind of encourage, if you're trying to go up that mastery list, to spread out your skills among the varying things that benefit your class.
Yeah, I mean, I would never tell a Mimitar Logi to max out hacking, day one. I mean, that's just not a good idea.
Max Maybe system hacking is such a wonderful skill, though.
Oh, it's an awesome skill.
Mimitar Scout, it's required.
Yeah, it should be maxed out, but my point is, you aren't going to tell someone who's 3 months old that should be level 5, because there's other stuff they need at that point. So get it to 2 or 3, off the bat. That's a good idea. I think making it very clear, like you said, with mastery levels on, you should fill out mastery rank 1 before moving on to mastery rank 2, and that's going to really kind of help that progression be more logical and make sense for players, because people say, oh, well, should I get electronics maxed out to 5? And I went, yes, but not right away. Get it to 3 or 4, get it to 5 later when you need it, because it's an expensive skill to get up to 5. Level 5 costs as much as levels 1 through 4 combined. So, players often get confused when you say, "Oh yeah, that's the best skill to have. You should set it out." And they go, "Really? Well, no, not right away." So, I don't want it to be confusing for new players in that regard.
Well, speaking of electronics and engineering, why are those skills such high multipliers?
Because they're damn useful.
We're getting...
but they're also very basic skills. And if you look at the armor skill, the shield skill, those both have a multiplier of, I think, 2 or 3.
We're like real close to time, but this is a fantastic discussion. I'd like to say that this will be controversial. I absolutely hate the core skills. I've come to this conclusion after a very long period of time. I think that they're terrible for anything except inducing tears, and very discernible differences between being a veteran player with a bunch of skill points and not being, and that you end up essentially gimped day 1 of Dust 514 because you have 25% less power grid, 25% less CPU, similar amounts lacking in shield and armor. I don't think it's very rewarding gameplay.
Well, that would be the basis behind going and moving towards lowering those requirements, because that would make those skills less of a barrier for new players. It would change it from, this skill is a really easy skill and it's very useful, where it won't make it as much of an issue.
I can agree with that. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing when we talk in the barbershop about raising new scouts, we always press them. You need to get your core skills up. We know it's a grind, but you've got to do it over time. They're just that important. I would really agree that just make them less of a grind, because they're really the basis for anyone wanting to go to the competitive level. Is you got to have your core skills up, and you've got to have what you need there, and it's such a grind for new players.
Well, I think this is probably a pretty good topic, but we're unfortunately against a hard time limit here. Zell's got to get going, I think.
So Iron Wolf. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's postpone this for next week. I'd love to have you guys back and we can discuss this in detail. But for right now, let's do some quick shout outs. We'll go on the list. Just anyone you want to do a shout out to, just let's have it. So Ghost.
Shout out to the barbershop, you guys. Shout out to Anime Empire. You guys are fun to chat to, and shout out to my corporation, because you guys are awesome.
Okay, Iron Wolf.
Hey, shout out to Snorri. Shout out to CCP Ratati, CCP Logibro. Shout out to the United States Postal Service.
All right.
That joke's going over most people's heads.
All right, Killer.
Shout out to all the folks in Top Men and Corporate Raiders, as well as to the devs.
All right, Leither.
Sure. I'll let me look this up. I'll do a personal plug. First, I'll say shout out to, of course, my Alliance and Corp. You guys are great. And if you do the Twitter thing, let me bring up my Twitter. I believe it is twitter.com/LeitherY, if you want to follow me on Twitter.
All right, sounds good. Shout out to my corp, OS Chief Hunter Operations, and shout out to Derry, who was gonna stream for us this week, but he cut the tip of his finger off. So he's been recovering from that, but we'll hopefully have him back next week, and we'll be streaming again, so I apologize for that. And shout out to you guys for coming on. Good to see you faces here, so hope to see you next week.
Leither, take your finger off the button. And I'm going to give my shout out to Ghost Kaiser, Killer 12, and Leither Yitron for giving us a couple of new guests, which is always nice. Sometimes our episodes tend to feature the same people over and over, so it's really cool to have new voices in the chat.
Thank you.
Yep,
all right, guys. Well, that's going to conclude our episode. Hope to see you again next week. So this is episode 17 of Biomassed. We don't really have a title. We'll have to figure it out later because I think these guys have to go to a meeting. So catch you next week, and thanks for listening.